Thank you. So a lot of the executive directors here do presentations. I do all the time to the Rotary Clubs, to Lions Club, Kiwanis, all that kind of stuff. And it's really easy because they don't know anything about your business. It gets kind of intimidating when you're looking at 100 people that can call BS on what you're saying at just about any time. I have 3 commissioners, as most of us do. They're all here, I believe. If you could raise your hand when I call Commissioner Bobby Briscoe. Commissioner Michael Shepard. Is Michael in here? Maybe not. Oh, he's back there. And Commissioner Ken Bell. Between the 3 of them, they have a whole whopping 5 years of commissioner experience. They are the best commission in the state. So we operate Bellingham International Airport. The airport saw a tremendous period of growth from 2008 to about 2014. The least percentage growth in those years was 15%. We had growth as high as 25%, and that's talking about in-plane passengers, putting passengers onto the airplane. We just assume they actually get off the plane. So in 2014, we had our peak year. We put 600,000 people on airplanes. This year, we'll do about 450,000 people. The biggest difference in the decline in our business is solely due to the Canadian dollar. The exchange rate is now at about 78 cents. In 2014, our peak year for passengers, the exchange rate was at par. So we are heavily dependent on the Canadian traveler, and the only reason our community has an airport of this size is because we're able to draw Canadians across the border. We're just not a big enough community to support the airport otherwise. One of our biggest strengths of our airport is that we are the low-cost producer. We average about $2.50 for an airline to put a passenger on an airplane. We believe at YVR Vancouver Airport, that number is more like 25 bucks. So you can see we're a tremendous value for the airlines. One of our weaknesses is what I just talked about. Our community isn't big enough to support an airport of our size. We have to draw from other communities. We have to steal customers from Canada. Opportunities for our airport would be direct connections to Salt Lake City, direct connections to Denver, and we would love to get an direct international down to Mexico. A lot of the Canadian traffic is going to YVR and then going directly to Mexico, and we'd like that traffic to come down to Bellingham. And then our threats, there's 2 of them. The ultra low-cost carrier growth in Canada has them using Abbotsford as an airport. And then obviously Payne Field's coming online, and they have a direct flight on United to Denver, and that's going to really slow down our ability to get a direct flight to Denver. We do have, you're looking at our route map here. We have nonstops on Allegiant to Tucson, Mesa, Vegas, Palm Springs, San Diego, Los Angeles, Oakland. And then we have Alaska. Will take you directly to Seattle 5 or 6 times a day. They'll take you to Kona seasonally from November through May, and they'll take you to Maui. And when they announce those are seasonal flights, so about every August they announce that they're going to do the next season. And if you're really on top of it, there are people who have booked round trip to Kona for 350 bucks. Again, next August, get on the web and look for those flights. We run the Bellingham Shipping Terminal. Our terminal sat idle for a number of years. I'm going to go back to the shipping terminal and talk more about it. We run the Bellingham Cruise Terminal, which is down in Fairhaven, and it's the southern terminus of the Alaska Marine Highway System. We also run the Bellingham train station, or the Fairhaven station, which is where Amtrak stops, the Greyhound bus stops. We run a harbor up in Blaine, which has about 800 slips. You're looking at the marina up there, along with our Blaine industrial area, which is composed of a shipyard and 3 or 4 fish processors. We're going to come back to all this, so I'm just giving you kind of the overview here. We also run a marina in Bellingham called Squalicum Harbor, and there's about 1,200 slips there, and that is comprised of both commercial fishermen and of recreational boaters. We have an extensive real estate portfolio. Our real estate portfolio is about 6,000 acres total, I believe. And you're looking at a picture of the Bellwether Peninsula. The Bellwether Hotel is on the end of that peninsula, right there. Some of you have probably stayed at that hotel. This is a total of 20 years of development, this area. And the port owns this office building, that office building. The rest is all owned by the private sector. However, we own the land underneath the entire development. So let's talk about our shipping terminal. This terminal was very busy in the 70s and 80s, hauling aluminum ingots and logs. When Intelco started doing something differently with how they buy their aluminum and GP started to shut down, our shipping terminal was largely idle. We essentially had no business from 2000 to 2017. And one of the biggest problems we had with attracting business to our shipping terminal was we didn't have the proper depth. We had a lot of silting in from the Nooksack River on our terminal, and when we're supposed to have 40 feet at the berth, we had about 28 feet at the berth. So we couldn't get the bigger ships to call on us. We weren't allowed to dredge that because it needed a cleanup plan. It was contaminated materials from the Georgia Pacific legacy activity, and so we needed to come up with a cleanup plan that all the regulatory agencies bought off on before we could do our dredge work. About 2016, we got those permits. We did our cleanup. We got dredged to our navigable depth, and we replaced a roof on one of our two warehouses. 2017, we did the other warehouse roof. We hired a business development manager whose sole task was to find shipping business for our terminal. He was not to do anything else, solely focused on that. And then in 2017, we had our first ship call in over 17 years, and it brought in soy and cornmeal from Turkey, of all places. And then a couple months after that, we sent a log ship out. So I go through this because it's an example how with proper planning and a lot of 17 years of planning, you can actually have a ship call on your port. So we're still at it today. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got some electrical upgrades we'd like to do. We need to strengthen our dock. But we did recently sign an agreement with Ports of America to be an exclusive stevedoring company for certain cargoes. They're very limited cargoes, but they're cargoes that we thought they could help us market and bring into our port. In return, Ports of America is bringing a bunch of equipment to our port that then can be used for those cargoes, and we don't have to purchase that equipment. One of the biggest endeavors the Port of Bellingham is doing is we're expanding our marine trades area. Our community has always heavily relied on the marine trades, and we want to make sure we keep that activity in Bellingham. It's really easy to have these waterfront areas gentrify. The doctors, the lawyers, and such can pay a lot more rent than the marine trades can. So we work hard to set aside areas that are dedicated strictly to marine trades areas, and we don't allow other activities in those buildings or on those lands. And that keeps those rates low. And I'll talk about another program we did to help with those rates here in a minute. So 6,000 jobs is in the title there, and I think that's probably grown since that study was done. We created a water-reliant real estate policy. And basically what that policy does is it gives a 5% discount to any marine trades business for their rents. So in addition to saying in certain areas, geographically restricting certain areas to marine trades only, we've also discounted those rents to encourage that type of activity on those lands. You're looking at a picture of the Fairhaven shipyard. The Fairhaven shipyard was getting very crowded. It had a shipyard there called the Fairhaven shipyard, and also had All-American Marine there. All-American Marine builds boats, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures of some of the boats they build. Right now you're looking at a picture of the Faithful Servant, which is a dry dock. It's a semi-submersible dry dock. That gets towed out to the middle of Bellingham Bay. They sink it. They bring the ship over the top of it. They then raise it. They then tow it back into the dock, and it sits dockside here where they do the repairs. This is a fixed-in-place dry dock. It doesn't move. In 2000 and, I think we might be on the next slide here, about 2016, we had half of this dock was new. The outer portion here was cement, and then the inner portion was failing timber wood surface. We wanted the shipyard to stay in business while we repaired and replaced that wood surface, and we couldn't figure out how they could get out to the cement portion when they were now kind of separated on an island. So what the engineers came up with was they did it in two phases, and they literally drew a line laterally down the middle of that pier, and they replaced half of it in one project and then the other half in the other, and that allowed the shipyard to move stuff back and forth between the Faithful Servant and their mainland operations. We also took All-American Marine, who builds boats down there in the very back of this site. All-American Marine was right in this building. They would build 100-foot long, different types of vessels, mostly aluminum catamaran style, and then they would launch them on a marine railway here. And a lot of times, those launches would cost about $10,000 bucks, and a lot of times they couldn't even do it because the shipyard would have pulled something up on that railway blocking them from locking their vessel, and then they'd have to pay a penalty because they didn't get to launch their boat on time. Both these businesses, both All American Marine and the shipyard, wanted to expand, and there was no room for them to do that. So we moved All American Marine from this location in Fairhaven to the central waterfront in Bellingham, right by the port offices, right next to that Bellwether Peninsula I showed you. We built them a brand new facility where they could build bigger boats. And then we came up with a very creative way for them to launch. We took our existing boat launch that the recreational 20-foot bayliner gets launched on, and we figured out how to launch a 120-foot vessel on that. You're looking at a picture of the Argosy vessel that All American Marine recently built. That's the port offices right next door to it. And if you were launching your 20-foot bayliner right here, you may feel a little small. But it worked out great. It's an all-day affair. We created a route for them to get from their building to this boat launch. And they put it on a trailer, and they just gradually creep over to the boat launch. And then, over about a 6-hour period of time, they put it into the water. It floats away, and then Commissioner Briscoe here pulls his skiff up to it. He pulls that big 120-foot vessel over to a dockside area where they do the final fit out. And I'm not kidding. Our fishermen literally bring their skiffs, and they haul this thing from inside our harbor, inside our marina, out to the Whatcom Waterway. And they do that as a community gesture, a community goodwill thing, because they love maritime businesses and they just want to help out. I think you get paid like a gift certificate for dinner typically for doing that. So it is like an old-fashioned community barn raising when we launch one of these vessels. It's all hands on deck and everyone's just making it work. So it's really cool to see. This is a picture of the central waterfront. The All American Marine building I talked about is going to be right in here. It's not in this picture. We built it right about there. You're looking at a picture of the ASB, Aeration Stabilization Basin, and it's where all the processed water from Georgia Pacific went, and that's all out in this. Heavily contaminated, and the port needs to clean that up. This is the Whatcom Waterway, and this is the I&J Waterway. This is all reserved for marine trades. GP former mill over here. Some of this will gentrify. This is our shipping terminal. This is probably the biggest liability we face. We think it's about a $50 million cleanup. What we'd like to do with that is we'd like to fill half of it, take the bad stuff from this half, put it into this half, create an upland area here, put a bulkhead in and create a hard edge, and then breach this out to Bellingham Bay so that we can have either ship traffic or barge traffic or commercial fishing traffic. We're not sure what use we're going to do, but we think that's the most economical cleanup we can do. And it creates the uplands that we need for our marine trades area and gives us a little more hard edge surface to dock up against. The central waterfront area that you just saw the picture of has some historical contamination. Some of that's been cleaned up. Some of it is ongoing. It is a MOTCA site. We had failing infrastructure. As you can see, that's not the prettiest dock in the world. It needs some work. But over the past couple of years, we have rebuilt a lot of that. And now we have a new common use barge terminal. And what that means is that the various businesses around that area, if they have a barge coming in, they literally make an appointment to use the terminal for that day, a reservation, and then they're allowed to use it for whatever period of time they need to unload that barge. So the port owns the terminal. We don't really operate it, though. We let the users that rent real estate from us in that area operate it. You're seeing a train being lifted off of a barge in Bellingham. That was shipped down to Arlington, where it's going to be rebuilt. And then it'll go back on a barge back up to Alaska, where it hauls tourism all summer long. This just occurred a couple weeks ago. You're also looking at a map, and that is mostly the lands the Port of Bellingham acquired in 2005 from the Georgia Pacific acquisition. The gray area, again, is our marine trades area. This is that ASB I talked about. The blue area is what we call the downtown waterfront area. It's about 40 acres, and it is going to gentrify. It'll be offices, it'll be retail, and it will be residential, and that's going on now. We're going to see a video of that work later. We have a lot of activities up in Blaine. I talked about the marina up there. It's about 800 boat slips. And then we have a industrial area, which has a boatyard on this end. And then we have fish processing on the other three corners. There's a web locker, fisherman storage building right here. All of these buildings want to expand, but we kind of run out of room in that area. We had 2 existing web lockers up here. We're building a third one there, And then we're going to tear this one down to create space in this area for these businesses to expand. This also is a Matka site. This is about a $12 million cleanup. It's ongoing. We just got done with about $4 million worth of petroleum cleanup in this area. These buildings are no longer there. So again, we get rid of this web locker and these buildings, we've now created some new uplands that these businesses can expand into. And they're at capacity. They need to expand. You can see that we had some failing bulkheads, and that causes these sinkholes. And as we're doing these cleanup activity, we're using these Matka funds to help replace some of these bulkheads and then having a new product there. So Blaine is a border town, obviously. Blaine has always kind of suffered economically. It's not a robust town. But with the work we're doing and with the jobs we're attracting to our lands, we're starting to turn that around. And the Blaine city itself is seeing some growth in residential activity. They're seeing some new business activity. They just got a Starbucks, so they must be doing something right. And this is a shameless plug for Sea Feast. We conducted our 3rd annual Sea Feast this year in 2018. Next year will be the 4th annual. In the first year of Sea Feast, we had 10,000 visitors. This is done in Zwanos Point Park. It's down in our marine trades area, and all kinds of activities. It's a 2-day event, and if you can't see it, it's eat, play, explore, and then eat some more. That's the whole philosophy of Sea Feast. And lots of activities down there. You can get on a fishing boat. You can watch how they mend nets. You can talk to All American Marine about how they build boats. You can take a tour of All American Marine. You can take a tour of Bellingham Cold Storage. This event was done with tourism money. In the first couple of years, that grant has now tapered off, and it's going to be self-supporting with a couple checks from the Port of Bellingham. But other than that, the event is going to stand on its own 2 legs, and it grows every year. We get more and more people into town from it, and it's going to grow to be a signature event from Bellingham, much like Ski to Sea is. So the GP, this is the most aggressive project the Port of Bellingham has undertaken in probably its history. In 2005, they acquired the Georgia Pacific site. You can see the picture there on the left is a full-blown paper mill fully operating. As they shut down, these lands became available, and the Port of Bellingham bought it for a whole whopping $10. What I didn't tell you is we inherited $100 million worth of cleanup liability that went with that $10. But you saw the industrial picture. This is a picture of the same site. When we bought the property, we created a partnership with the city of Bellingham, and the city was going to come in and put the roads, the utilities, and build the parks. The Port of Bellingham was going to act as the cleanup manager and then sell the property and act as the developer. The white building you're looking at is the granary building. That was a building that we weren't sure whether it could be saved or not, and the developer currently is building that out and should open that up in about 2 months. It'll have offices in there. There's going to be a beauty salon in there. The first floor is going to be a micro Pike Place market with lots of different vendors in it. They're building an annex on the back side of it, right where this pad is. That'll house a restaurant, probably a brew pub, because we only have about 20 of those in Bellingham. We need another. And you can see the first park the city built is right here. This is a acid ball. It was filled with concrete lined, it's a concrete lined structure that was filled with acid. And I'm going to show you a video here in a second, and you're going to watch that acid ball move from one location on the site to another. It weighs 400,000 pounds. Let's watch the video. There's the acid ball. So that was 1 year of activity. So when people tell me it's not moving fast enough, I just show them that video. One of the other things that Port of Bellingham has accomplished in the last year is we've created a new method of doing economic development. So in the past, the city of Bellingham did their thing, the Whatcom County did their thing, and the Port of Bellingham did its own thing. And a lot of these efforts were duplicated. So my commission gave me instructions. They wanted to change the way we do economic development. They wanted to be more effective. And so the first thing I did was I hired someone else to do it so I didn't have to. And with that, I'd like to introduce Don Goldberg. Sorry, Don. Don comes to us from the Port of Portland, and he is our new Economic Development Director. And what Don did was he created a tri-funder approach to economic development where the city, the port, and Whatcom County all contribute to one fund, and then he runs economic development out of that fund. So when I think I have it bad because I have to report to 3 commissioners, he has to report to 3 commissioners, 7 county council members, and 7 city council members. That's enough to get you a beer tonight. So part of our approach to economic development, and we are Bellingham, we try to be very clean. We're doing some district energy, and that site you saw the road being built. Underneath that road, we put in the piping necessary to have district energy. And the thinking there is there's a couple of resources nearby that we can pull heat off of. One of them is the Puget Sound Energy Cogeneration Plant, which is a natural gas-fired peaking plant. It only comes up on when power hits a certain level, a certain price point. It makes it profitable for them to run that plant. They fire up the burners, and then they create a lot of steam, and they do that through their cooling towers. We'd like to capture that steam, run it through those pipes we put under the ground, and use that steam to heat our buildings. Bellingham's main sewer line also runs adjacent right next to this site, and I understand that the technology now is you can pull 10 degrees off the sewer and use that to heat buildings. So both of those concepts are being looked at. We're not sure how they're going to play out, but what the Port of Bellingham did in advance of that is we put those pipes under the ground so we don't have to tear up the road later to do it. They're there. It was very cheap since the trenches were already open. We threw pipes in there, and then we'll utilize those into the future as the technology is developed to do so. We brought iTech Energy into town, and they later sold to Silfab, but Silfab is the largest solar panel manufacturing in Canada. iTech is one of the larger ones in Washington State, so they've now combined, and they employ about 100 people right down by that cogen plant, and they produce solar panels. Salmon hatchery, you heard about the feeding the orcas. We're trying to expand our hatchery. We have a hatchery that's run by Bellingham Technical College, and that hatchery doesn't produce nearly the salmon that we'd like it to. So we formed a group with private sector folks to study hatcheries, and what we've done is we've looked at the Alaska model, and the Alaska model we think is really effective. We're not sure how that fits into Washington. There's some tribal concerns and other concerns that prohibit doing it just like Alaska does. But we went up and visited Juneau's hatchery, the Macaulay hatchery up there. And what they do is they raise Chinooks, they raise silvers, they wear chum and pink. And they take these and they release them at remote sites. And then as the fish return, they take the first 17% of the catch and they use that to fund the hatchery. So instead of being funded by tax dollars, it's funded by the fisherman's catch. It's a very cooperative effort up there between the commercial fishermen and between the state and the hatchery folks. And we'd like to try and duplicate that model in Bellingham. In fact, that ASB that I talked about filling in half of it has been identified as one of the potential sites to locate that hatchery at. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you.